Drug litigation didn't wreck them, or the thing that almost killed the creative burnout. The Rolling Stones filed for bankruptcy in 1967. Although they were world-renowned, by 1971 they were deceived, broke, and banished. The 5 phrases that would haunt the culprit. It seemed like a decent deal for decades. This is how an accountant came to be from New Jersey almost ruined the rocks. The Stones lost to the finest band mastery of their most well-known tracks and the last-ditch gamble that prevented their careers. The Rolling Stones in 1965 are enjoying their first enormous hit, "I'm Unable to Get No Contentment." In spite of selling millions of keeps track of the funds coming into their bank accounts appear strangely thin. They only receive 15% from their U.S. record deal. Far lower royalties rate than what other leading artists were making money, including Alan Klein, a determined accountant from Newark, was raised in an orphanage following the death of his mother. Klein won them over when he was 4 years old. With bold assurances of sumptuous meals and fast money seems to be their salvation. Opposing the establishment of the sector, the record company's argument was straightforward. "Are taking advantage of you, and I may obtain your reimbursement." For the Stones' working-class Klein's strategy appeared ideal, and he was Keith Richards, like us, would eventually remember that he wasn't British. Celebrities with the fake accents. He was genuine, and he pledged to provide us with "We Were Due." When the Stones initially Andrew Lug Oldham, the manager, brought Klein in to manage their money in 1965, Klein wowed the band right away by landing a new contract that increased their rate of royalties to 25%. He discovered money they were unaware of. Were due and sent checks that produced their eyes suddenly. More money was coming in from locations that we had never seen previously. Richards recalled that it was similar to magic, but there is always a cost. The Stones would soon learn the price. They had struck a bargain with Satan. The young Stones were primarily musicians. On making art without understanding the fine print of intricate contracts, the agreement that would come back to haunt them, depending on a corporate client, established a structure that radically altered their relationship, using their own tunes rather than the direct ownership of the Rolling Stones, obtaining royalties from the music and Klein's record label Allen and Betty Klein Company. ABKCO would be in charge of their ABCO would next produce the recordings. Records, distribute them to merchants, and essentially give the Stones royalties. The group started working for Klein's business instead of being their own proprietors. The framework of the music arrangement via buyout contracts. Under these binds Klein's the Stones recording would be purchased by ABKCO rights, after which the result is sold goods that provide the band its fair share following a significant cut. This setting wasn't really out of the ordinary for the time, but the reason Klein's strategy the level was quite troublesome. Of authority he upheld, and the absence of openness regarding the precise amount money was flowing in and going out. Klein wants to seize us on our futures. Mick Jagger would subsequently state that the agreement covered most of their recordings made from 1965 to 1970. Time frame that gave rise to some of their finest. Painted Black, Ruby Tuesday, a classic piece. Jack Flash Jumping, and records such as Beggar's Banquet, Aftermath, and Let It. These weren't your typical songs. Bleed served as the cornerstone for the Stones. The young Stones' legacy is not older than signed the agreements in their mid-20s. Without being completely aware of the long-term consequences, it was the cost of, and Keith Richards' schooling would later reflect honestly, but the actual price of that learning would be much more difficult. More than they could have. By 1970, the paradox was thought to be the Rolling Stones were much larger, more than ever, but their financial situation was in. Despite their worldwide fame, they are in ruins. Restricted trips due to dried-up royalties, underfunded, and facing an impending 93% tax bill. On paper, they were rock royalty, but almost bankrupt in actuality, as Jagger subsequently claimed. A $125 million advance had been planted by Klein. A claim straight into his own account that would emerge as the focal point of their legal action. However, the Stones weren't completely innocent of their own extravagant expenditure. In addition to Klein's financial, a perfect storm was generated by poor management. The most deadly strike was delivered by Klein's non-payment of the UK's 5 years of taxes. This wasn't merely it was an oversight. Disastrous given the highest tax rate in Britain for wealthy individuals at an astounding this carelessness cost the Stones 93%. In danger of going bankrupt, Clean had organized their company in a manner that made them accountable for this taxes when he was still in charge of their resources via the truth regarding ABKCO's financial situation. When it became apparent, the Stones formed a final split from Clean in 1970, yet breaking up with him was just the start of their issues. Clean maintained control over their recordings. Through the band and ABKCO continued to deal with the enormous tax bill that he had permitted accumulate with the tax officials in Britain. The Stones' ending made a dramatic deciding to depart from England completely in 1971. They moved to the south of France, not for fun, but because monetary. We didn't travel to France for the survival weather. Richards would remark thereafter, "We go since we were completely broke and straightforward." Yet many admirers romanticized this time as an erotic journey, on the reality on the French Riviera was much more desperate, and the group was getting ready to battle the Rolling Stones. Filed a lawsuit back in 1972. Lawsuit requesting damages of $29 million from the legal complaint of Alan Clean alleged breach of fiduciary duty and fraud, and they filed a lawsuit against Clean for millions, exposing his deceptive tactics of businesses that aim to hide financial rivers, but would eventually become losing control of their 1960s and 1984 masters for a small percentage of their value. At Klein's was at the center of the litigation. Authority over the American Nanker Felga production firm that managed the Stones' U.S. company. The band said they had been misled by Clean on how it was used by the business to maintain authority over their money while restricting their ability to access their own funds. The band had to continue to battle. Clean is facing two legal fronts. And against their actual growing debts. According to the lawsuit, Clean had through deceptive or misleading claims convinced the Stones to give him authority over their commercial activities and had not accurately factored in royalties. Claiming the Stones, Clean defends the lawsuit, were attempting to alter history and their agreements. He insisted everything he did was explained in the agreements that they had signed. Only in 1984 was a resolution reached. Ultimately, the terms were far from a total triumph for the Stones, who got almost $1 million in royalties that were previously withheld, but ABKCCO retained authority over the rights to the most of their 1965 recordings. Up until 1970 the Stones were also necessary for the colony to offer one last album of fresh material, granting Clein the authority to release any recordings that haven't been published from around that time, including the well-known Rock and Roll Circus TV's educational special, which Keith Richards had mentioned arrived at a tremendous expense, the loss of their heritage in music. While Alan Clean was battling their legal team, the Rolling Stones were in court. The pressing difficulty of reconstruction their profession while living in exile. At the beginning of 1971, Keith Richards rented Villeneuve, a 16-room Ville-Rare mansion without a professional studio. Close to nice, accessible, and unable to afford to rent one of the Richards' basement was transformed by Stones into an improvised recording studio in a hot basement with power outages and a heroin haze. Exile on Main Street was created by them. Desperation led to the creation of this grim masterpiece. It wasn't at all hot in the basement. Wet and inadequately ventilated, the electrical system was insufficient, which led to regular power interruptions that go beyond the band's technical issues were battling. Richards' personal demons had become severely addicted to heroin. Frequently nodding or becoming missing for days off when recording, Mick Jagger assumed the majority of the business duties that often require flying to consult with attorneys and finance. Mick, the advisor, had to take over as the since I was an all-around later, Junkie. Richards acknowledged that someone had to maintain the ship's buoyancy. In spite of these difficulties, the Stones created what many people think about their exile on Main Street, the Masterwork, published in 1972 as a double album, capturing a band's unadulterated, unrefined sound in a basement, having fun and making music that was a reflection of their situation. Rebellious, real, and rootsy recording sessions would frequently begin in the dusk and carry on till daybreak. Hangers-on and musicians crowded the villa, establishing a carnival-style atmosphere, but there is enchantment amid this mess. Songs like Tumbling Dice Suite were played Shine a Light and Virginia came out of the raw footage from the basement sessions' vitality of their challenging conditions. I'm astounded that we completed any task, Charlie Watts would later, but occasionally when the back is against the wall. The best content emerges from exile on Main Street would later be known as among the best rock records ever, provided evidence of the Stones' adaptability in the face of difficulty. The album that was almost cancelled due to their economic difficulties turned into the foundation for their musical comeback. The Stones' initial hits were lost to the estimated value of ABKCCO is between $200 and $300. The amount of money that Led Zeppelin and Pink Floyd records were exchanged for, although after 1971, Jagger's Savvy constructed a billion-dollar empire via unparalleled success on tour and licensing agreements, even while the Stones continue to get royalties from publishing as songwriters. The profitable master is in ABKCO's management. Recording rights for their creations from albums from 1965 to 1970 that have tens of millions of copies were sold globally when Contentment or Leaping Jack Flash appears or plays on the radio. In ads, TV series, or films, the majority of the proceeds go to ABKCO. Royalties from master recordings. The impact of this arrangement is astounding. Especially out of the ordinary in the music industry, whilst numerous artists have battled for authority over their master recordings, few well-known bands have lost their possession of such a large percentage of their catalog, particularly during at the height of their artistic production. In contrast to their catalog after 1971, the Stones struck in 2018 and signed a new distribution agreement with Universal Music Group for their catalog value after 1971 roughly $500 million. Indicating a worth more than $1 in total billion. If they had continued to own, the total value of their whole catalog would probably be significantly more. Despite this substantial financial loss, the Stones were able to reconstruct their empire following their split from Clean. They established their own label. Rolling Stones Records is providing them with much more authority over their music and finances affairs. The encounter with Klein radically altered the band's approach. Jagger, the business in specifically, became deeply active in the group's financial choices, becoming known as one of the rock's most astute entrepreneurs. When the Beatles were thinking of employing Klein in, Jagger gave John Lennon a straight warning in 1969. With Alan Klein, conducting business would be the most significant error in your life. In any case, the Beatles eventually employed him. Having to contend with their own legal disputes with the manager in spite of the irreversible loss of the Stones' early master recordings, constructed one of the most prosperous rock careers, and their tours constantly rank among the best, making the most money worldwide. With their 2005 to 2007's A Bigger Bang tour brought in more than $558 million. But their deal's shadow. Klein is still there when classic Stone today, music from the 1960s are played. Acts as a reminder of the costly they funded their schooling into the music industry. Klein's encounter with the Stones didn't simply alter their business strategy. It changed the way the whole song following Klein, the band, the industry operates, invented novel methods of touring that maximized income and authority. They were among the first to employ corporate tour sponsorships that establish a template that artists continue to use today. Their retail business turned into a model of profitability and efficiency, broadening their brand beyond only music. Above all, they kept tight authority over their resources. The Stones never put their financial destiny in danger again. In the hands of one individual, they constructed a group of advisors, each having distinct duties and supervision for each. Every transaction was examined in the contract. Analyzed from several perspectives, this strategy paid off. By the 1980s, the Stones had changed from being a financial victims of business innovators. The Steel Wheels tour in 1989 established new benchmarks for rock touring's financial success, earning more than $140 million and setting the standard for contemporary stadium tours, and their enduring impact to younger musicians from Bruce Springsteen to Taylor Swift. Innumerable, the Stones have been referenced by musicians. Warning story as inspiration for taking authority over their own company matters. The unpleasant lessons that the Stones discovered from Klein became an important source of knowledge for generations of artists who kept up with the Rolling Stones. Story with Alan Klein is regarded as one of the finest tales of caution. A tale of how even though the largest rock band in the world may locate themselves fractured during the peak of their fame as a result of one dishonest transaction from their early faith in Klein as a third party defending their rights to the terrible insight that he had arranged agreements to his advantage at their journey at the Stones' expense demonstrates the music's darker side. Company's subsequent tax ban recording sessions in the basement and years of court cases demonstrate both the personal cost of financial poor leadership and the extraordinary resilience that enabled them to triumph. They seem to have lost control forever. One of their best-known early tunes that kept making millions in income for Klein's business instead of the musicians that composed them, Stones, came out of the experience as more astute, professional, and eventually more prosperous. There the cost of education was extremely high. But they benefit from the lessons they learned. Create an empire that keeps growing. The next time, more than 50 years later, you hear Jumping Jack or Satisfaction, remember the band, flash on the radio. That produced those classic songs had to battle for each and every dime they received from them and suffered defeat in that battle in ways that still have an impact on them now. Have you ever signed a document without first reading the fine print, then later repented? Share your experiences in the remarks section below. Someone else could gain knowledge from your errors without incurring the consequences you